The features found on Hogslat's free access stall make it simply the best you can buy for your operation. The stalls are manufactured from galvanized 12-gauge tube and 5/8 inch rod with stainless steel assembly hardware. Adjustable stainless steel feet insert into stainless steel legs and pivot to a slat opening. The gate mechanism consists of large stainless steel pivot points allowing for trouble-free activation without weights or springs. To learn more about our free access stalls, go to our website at www.hogslat.com.
Good afternoon. We'll get going again. This next presentation is Daryl Holtkamp. Daryl has been a part of the veterinary college here for now how many years, Daryl?
15?
15 years.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so certainly Daryl's done a lot of excellent work on swine biosecurity, and we'll listen to his comments regarding the sow farm today. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the introduction. All right, so this afternoon I'm going to try to address two questions for you. One is, have investments in biosecurity been effective? And the second question is, what can we do to make more sustainable progress? So the second question kind of informs the answer to the first question. So I think Dr. Pullman showed this slide this morning. I believe that was him. This is from the Minnesota Swine Health Monitoring Project. Bob Morrison started this back in 2009, and now Cesar Corzo is continuing that. And so they report this once a week. It's a cumulative incidence of outbreaks of PRRS. They report for PED as well. And you can see here that each line represents 1 year. They have the PRRS season runs from July through June of the following year. And kind of the same take home that he got out of that, about 20 to 40% of our farms, sow farms, have PRRS outbreaks every year, okay? And that's getting a little, as we add more years, or they add more years on that, it gets a little bit messy to read. So what I did here is I basically took the annual incidence, the cumulative annual incidence at the end of the year, and I just plotted it here in the line chart, okay? And so you can see here the percentage of sow farms that break every year with PRRS here. And you might notice there are a couple dips here, right? Otherwise, it goes up and down a little bit, but it stays up there above 25% usually, with these two exceptions here. What happened in those 2 years? Well, 2013, 2014, that was when we got PED virus, right? That was the spring of 2013 when that virus was introduced in the US. Producers, veterinarians kind of responded to that crisis, improved biosecurity or paid a lot more attention to biosecurity that year. And it looks like we had some spillover effect in PRRS, right? That was actually the quietest year we've ever had since Bob's started this, or since they've been tracking this, okay? The other dip over here was 2018-19, and that was when African swine fever was introduced in China. And so again, producers and veterinarians kind of freaked out about that and improved biosecurity. But in the meantime here, you notice that after PED, kind of crept back up again here, right? It took another crisis or fear of a crisis over here to get our attention to biosecurity again. And so what's happening then? Basically, we have this cycle that we got going on here. We have a crisis or fear of a crisis, and that the industry responds to that, becomes more vigilant, focuses on biosecurity for a while, and then that focus on biosecurity seems to work, right? Even though it's not being done necessarily strictly for PRRS, it has spillover effect. The annual incidence of PRRS outbreaks goes down. But then following that, we get the vigilance gets replaced by complacency, and we kind of have that incidence creep back up again, right? So progress is not really sustained. But one thing I didn't focus on in the middle here, though, too, is that to me, and granted, we only have 2 data points, or two points in this 10 years that they've been tracking this. But it looks to me like when we set our minds to it, we can make a difference, right? We can improve or reduce the frequency of outbreaks. It's just that we don't seem to be able to maintain or sustain that. And so we get this kind of roller coaster business that we got going on here. And so what can we do then to make more sustainable progress? Well, I think a little bit of a change in our mindset would help. So if we start thinking about every outbreak as a crisis, and then where some mistakes occurred, then we have an opportunity then to learn from those mistakes, right? And the key point there, though, is that we don't always learn from our mistakes. That's not guaranteed, right? So Al Lehman, some of you younger folks might not know him, but he was veterinarian at University of Minnesota, died at an early age, but he kind of famous in the industry. One of his favorite quotes or most memorable quotes was that one of the problems we have in the swine industry is we don't make mistakes fast enough. Okay, and part of that, what he meant by that was we learn from mistakes, and so we shouldn't be afraid to try things, right? Well, I would add to that, or let's say amend that a little bit. I think we make mistakes plenty fast. We make lots of mistakes. The problem is we don't learn from them very well. And so, when we can set our mind to it again, I think there are opportunities there to learn better from our mistakes when they occur. So what can we do then to maintain a higher level of vigilance, or maybe not higher, but at least a steady state of vigilance, and then learn from our mistakes? Well, it requires a more systematic approach. And what I'm going to propose to you today here, this approach we've been kind of following the last several years, is to look for the hazards, look for biosecurity hazards, right? We have to have a way of going in, trying to identify where these farms are most vulnerable to the introduction of pathogens that are going to cause outbreaks, like PRRS, BD. And then in doing that, that's going to give us the information we need then to prioritize where we want to spend our time and money first, okay? So when it comes to biosecurity, there's a lot of things we could focus on, a lot of things we could do. Okay, we got lots of lists of things that you probably have pulled out and felt guilty about, maybe if you're a producer, not doing. There's efforts to create standards now that things everybody has to do. But the truth is how do you know those are what you should be spending your money and time on first, right? And so I think we need a better way to sort of, there's a step we've been missing there. We need a way to go in and try to identify where the hazards are, where the farms are most vulnerable first, so then we can prioritize where we want to spend our resources. And so I sometimes describe this as a ready, aim, fire approach, as opposed to the ready, fire, aim approach that we take today. And so what we've been doing is following, let me call it an adaptation of HACCP. HACCP is a Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, developed for the food industry. Actually came out of the 1960s when we were first sending astronauts into space. They decided that foodborne illnesses in space were a bad thing, and so they developed an approach to try to minimize the risk of that, right? And so that's where HACCP was born. And so a key part of HACCP is this hazard analysis, this idea of going in and trying to identify where the hazards lie. Now, obviously, we can't adopt that wholesale from the food industry, but certainly concepts apply. And so in the context of assessing biosecurity on swine farms, I've sort of identified or defined this hazard analysis as a process of identifying hazards associated with the introduction of pathogens, swine or bacteria or viruses into swine herds, okay? And where the objective then is to identify where the most significant hazards are. So again, then we can use that information then to prioritize where we want to spend our biosecurity resources first. And so at the heart of it, a hazard analysis really involves a complete review of all the production events. So things like entry of employees, entry of semen, entry of gilts, all those are sort of typical production events that happen. And so if we want to understand where the hazards lie in those events, we have to dig into the details, right? We have to understand the who, what, when, where, and how of that. So who's doing what, what equipment are they using, where are they doing it, when did they do it, and probably most importantly, how did they do it, right? We need to understand all of that. And so that is the process then that we follow, or that we use then to conduct the hazard analysis. And so we've got a form now we've developed, got some kind of approach. I've probably done about 60, 70 of these myself. Others have used the same form, same approach. This is for the sow farms. We've developed this mostly for the sow farms, although I'm feeling more and more pressure to start to do more of these in the grow finish phase. because I happen to agree with, was that Steve, was that you this morning, said that a lot of the pressure we're getting from PRRS virus and other pathogens are coming from the grow finish phase there. And so I think we need to focus more on that as well. And so, but this is what we've been doing for the sow farms. I'm sorry, that was Mark actually said that, so don't mean to miscredit things to you. That was Dr. Mark Schwartz. But we've been doing most of these now for the sow farm. And so this list of events up here are the production activities or events that happen on normal sow farms, typical sow farms. And I would tell you that in 95% of the investigations that I've been involved in, this is a comprehensive list. Okay, it represents about everything that happens. Occasionally we run into one where maybe there's an office on the farm, or somebody lives there in a house, or there's a feed mill, something like that, where you have a different set of production events that may happen. Things are coming into that farm that aren't related to just the sow farm. But, all right, so when can you do these then? Well, you can either do them retrospectively or prospectively. Retrospectively, you're doing them after an outbreak, right? So you're have an outbreak, now you're going to look back in time to just right before the outbreak happened, and then you're going to look at everything that happened in that time period. And so in that context, we would call that or describe that as an outbreak investigation. 95% of the ones I've done have been retrospective as outbreak investigations. And I actually think there's a good reason for that that I won't go into, but producers tend to be very attentive at that time, right? That's the time to really, I think, learn from our mistakes, and that's really the purpose of doing them then. Prospectively, we can do them anytime. It doesn't have to be in the context of an outbreak, and the purpose there is to prevent future outbreaks, okay? And so you might think, well, yeah, that makes more sense. We should do more of those. But again, I have not found those to be as valuable as when you do these in the aftermath of an outbreak. So if I've piqued your interest at all to this point, I can point you to where you can find the form that we use to do these. It's on SHIC's website, Swine Health Information Center. It's swinehealth.org is the web address. If you go out there and click on or hover over this link here at the top, Emerging Diseases, and then click on the link to the Rapid Response Program, that'll take you to a page where a link on that page is to Rapid Response Resources. And you'll find on that page, you'll find this Word document here. Again, it's what we print these out. We usually will do this on paper form. We'll put them in binders, put tabs in there. You don't have to do that, but it's kind of a long form. If you don't do that, a little bit daunting, but once you get it sort of organized, it's a lot easier to get your head around. But it's editable too, so if you want to pick it up and do something else with it, you're welcome to do that too. And so really what we're trying to do here is standardize things a little bit. Veterinarians and even producers have done a lot of these outbreak investigations over the years, how they approach them, what information they use, those kinds of things are all over the board. I've seen just about everything. And so what we're trying to do is standardize that a little bit more, make it a little bit more consistent so that we can start to learn from our collective wisdom on doing these. And so involved in that, or part of that, is there's some standard terminology. We currently organize them by these production events, which I happen to like. I think that works very well. There's closed-ended questions in the form, and those closed-ended questions are not intended to be used as a survey. We don't use them as a survey. I don't recommend you use it as a survey, but rather they guide an open-ended discussion. So the good stuff comes out in the details, right? The result of that open-ended discussion. So if you're just reading questions and looking for a response, you will miss the good stuff. You'll miss 95% of the important stuff. So the closed-ended questions are there to guide the discussion. So we do try to provide information or answer those questions, though, as we go along, and that also can become part of a set of databaseable information then, too. It's pretty hard to database open-ended question responses to those. And then we have a risk scoring system behind this as well. It's purely subjective today. Like to make it a little bit more objective, made several passes at that, haven't without success so far. But it's basically we just rate each production event as either high, medium, or low as to the likelihood it was responsible for that outbreak, okay? And then I will just as an aside mention, there's a working group formed now with the people on in this list here. We've met a couple times. We're going to meet one more time before Christmas, and trying to take what we currently have and make it better, and present it at the end as a industry standard approach. Again, with the idea of trying to do a little bit better job of learning from the collective wisdom the things we all learn from these outbreak investigations. So that's in the works. So I've gone on quite a while here talking about hazard analysis, but I have yet to define what a hazard is, so I need to do that now. But a hazard in the context of assessing biosecurity on swine farms is a circumstance or action or inaction that is likely to result in a failure that may lead to the introduction of a pathogen, okay? And so bolded there or highlighted failure. What is a failure then in that context? Well, this is an important fundamental concept, I guess, to how we approach this. That is we look at it from the standpoint of there's 3 failures that have to happen for a virus to be introduced into a herd, okay? All 3 of these have to happen. If 2 of the 3 happen, we're still good. No outbreak, no introduction, okay? If all 3 happen, then we have an outbreak because a virus or bacteria was introduced into the herd, okay? And so the failures are, first, there's a failure to prevent contamination. So that's the first bad thing that happens, right? We have some pathogen carrying agent in this case, and we call pathogen carrying agents anything that can be contaminated or infected. So that could be a pig, could be a person, could be a piece of equipment, whatever, anything that can be contaminated or infected. So first failure is we have something, a pathogen carrying agent, get contaminated or infected. Okay. Second failure is that there's a failure to mitigate that, right? So if we have contamination or infection and we apply a disinfectant or clean or sanitize it and effectively eliminate it, we're good, right? So no problem, right? Or if it gets infected and we identify her before we bring her into a farm, no problem, right? But if we fail to do that, if we fail to mitigate that contamination or infection, now we're down to the third failure. And that last failure then is a failure to prevent the transmission of that pathogen to the pigs in a herd. Okay, so if that's an employee that has somehow managed to fail on these first 2 and comes into the farm, gets through the shower, still has pathogen on their hands or their hair or whatever, they're going to go work directly with the pigs and the sows, and so there's a very good chance that last failure is going to occur as well, that a minimum infectious dose of the virus or the bacteria is going to get through an appropriate route of entry for that pathogen into the pig and infect it, lead to a live active infection. Okay, and that's all it takes is just one pig, one sow, that index case, and now we're off to the races, okay? So all 3 of these failures, right, is what has to happen for a pathogen to be introduced into a herd and then subsequently cause an outbreak, okay? All right, so that's an important concept. Just to illustrate that a little bit more, give you an example here. Using the entry event is introduction or entry of replacement breeding gilts, okay? So when gilts come to our farm, there's several things that come with that activity of that event that can carry the virus into the farm or the pathogen. Okay, there's the gilt themselves, right? There's the trailer, there's a truck, there's the driver, there's his equipment that he uses to move the gilts. All those things could be potentially either contaminated or, in the case of the gilts, infected. For this example, we're going to focus strictly on the livestock trailer as the potential pathogen carrying agent here, okay? And so here are the failures, right? The first failure then is the trailer is contaminated with PRRS virus. Well, what's a hazard then that could lead to that? Well, we have non-dedicated trailers, right? And so we have a trailer that may haul positive pigs before it hauls our gilts. And so that may lead to that first failure. Second failure is there's a control measures intended to remove or inactivate the virus on the trailer failed. Okay, so maybe we have a truck wash, trailers washed and disinfected, dried maybe even between every load, but we've never gone out there and even asked them if they're following the protocols we set out at the beginning. Okay, that may sound strange to you, but believe me, it's not. That's the most common thing I see, right? Sometimes there's even a fear of going out there, right? Of sort of making them feel like you don't trust them in some way, right? And we got to get away or get around that idea, I guess, right? So that's a very common thing where, you know, nobody ever goes out and checks on those truck washes or trailer washes. Just spend a little time out there at a minimum, just see how things are done. So that's a big hazard then for that second failure, even if we have the right protocols in place. Okay, and then the third failure then is the pigs are infected, or the virus essentially is transmitted from the carrying agent, in this case the livestock trailer, to the pigs in a herd. And in this case, because we're hauling gilts on that livestock trailer, very likely that they're going to get infected while they're in transport, not 100%, but probably a pretty high probability. And so if we introduce them directly into the herd without isolating them first, then that's likely going to lead to that last failure, right? Now we got infected gilts, nose-to-nose contact with other pigs in the herd, and so we're very likely going to have an outbreak there, okay? All right, so the idea here, and then as a result, then now we've got a herd that's infected and we have an outbreak, okay? All right, so the other thing that you can use this idea for then is to say, okay, well, those are some of the hazards we identified. It looks like all three of those failures is quite possible. Maybe we have other evidence that suggests that there's a very good chance. Maybe the timing lined up. Maybe the trailer that we know, or the pigs that we know that trailer hauled right before came from a farm where we have a sequence and it matches identically with this one, or very close to it, right? So we got maybe some other information that's going to make us prioritize now this particular event. So we say, wow, there's, okay, a lot of hazards here. It looks like even this particular outbreak may have resulted because of this, right? So what do we do about that, right? Well, you can use the same thought process now to apply control measures, okay? And so you can say, you can target any one of these failures or the hazards associated with them, and you can say, well, if we want to target that first one, maybe we don't want to buy more trailers, right? We can't afford to do that, or don't want to do that. Make the capital investment in that to have a dedicated trailer for every farm, just for gilts. But we can maybe try to schedule the loads so that we do that in a way that we're not hauling positive pigs right before we haul negative gilts into a farm. And so that may be something we can do. For the second failure there, we may go out and just simply formally audit that trailer wash, right? Send somebody out there, make a commitment to go out there every quarter, once a quarter, every 6 months, something like that. Next thing, for the last failure there, we may say, well, let's try to isolate those gilts rather than introduce them directly in to the farm. Unfortunately, that may require capital investment in facilities, right? And so we may not be prepared to do that just yet. And so maybe you say, well, let's do this now. We can do that without a huge amount of expense. And so we target there. The other thing we could potentially do would be to reduce the frequency. So that's the other idea with these, thinking in terms of events. Every time an event happens, there's an opportunity for all three of these failures to occur, right? Something bad to happen. And so if you can reduce the frequency of these events, that's going to reduce the risk, right? Ultimately. And so in terms of delivery of gilts, if we have the space available to do that, we maybe go from every 2 weeks to every 4 weeks, right? On the other hand, if we don't have the space, then that's not going to be an option. Okay? All right, I'll wrap up here in the last few slides with what I described as hazard tales. I like to tell these are just things that we've come across. They're all true stories, things we've come across over the years. I could probably talk almost a day on hazard tales alone, just things we found over the last several years of doing these. But I put up, I think, three or four of these now just for illustrative purposes, just to give you a kind of an idea of the things that we sometimes unearth with these hazard analyses. Okay, this is not a particular instance here, but just in general, employee entry. It just always strikes me when I look at how often the frequency of this event compared to all the others, right? And this is a word cloud here of not specifically the event, but the carrying agents that come with employee entry, including the employee themselves, their lunches here, and then the employee vehicle. And so again, the size of the word there is representative of the frequency of that event. And so you can see that employee entry takes up probably more than half of that word cloud, right? It just really is. When I chart these on a bar chart, I always have to have a left axis and a right axis, because when I plot them on the same axis, you got You got employee entry way up here, and then everything else is down here where you can't tell the difference, right? It's just too much difference. And so it really is stunning to think about how often employees enter the farm. And so one employee, one day is considered an entry event. If they shower out and shower back in, that's a second. But that's how we count that. But it really is something, it's important to think about that these events that happen frequently are, just inherently more risky because every time they happen, there's a chance that we bring something in. The other thing is just the lack of knowledge and control over what employees do when they're away from the farm. And sometimes I think we fool ourselves with this one, that we think we have some control over that, or that even that we know maybe what they do. And I've run across so many stories now, so many of these hazard tales, that I've become convinced that we don't know nothing. We don't know anything about what these employees do when they're away from the farm, and we have no control over it at all. All right, this first one here then is one from an investigation we did earlier this year. This happened to be one of these lineage 1C variant PRRS outbreaks. And in this case, there was an employee that was transferred from another PRRS positive sow farm. And so their last day on that other PRRS positive sow farm was April 30th. And they had the weekend downtime, and then they started Monday morning, April 3rd, on the sow farm we were investigating that had the outbreak. The outbreak occurred on the 9th here, okay, about 6 days later. And the isolates, they had isolates for both of these sow farms, the one he worked on here and then the one at the one that had the outbreak. They were 99.3% similar. That outbreak from the other sow, or the sequence from the other sow farm was taken in November 2020, so it was old enough that 0.7% difference was pretty understandable, and so pretty certain those two were the same virus there. And then management was aware of the risk of doing this, so they didn't do this sort of willy-nilly. They did have him, have that employee have their car detailed over the weekend, okay? However, there was nobody knew anything else about anything else that employee did. So did he take a shower? Did anybody ask him to make sure he took a shower? Or at least 1 or 2 showers at home? Did he change clothes and make sure he didn't wear the same clothes and shoes to the other farm? Nobody knew anything about that. So my conclusion was nobody brought that up, right? So for some reason they decided to detail the car, which wasn't unimportant, but it might not have been the most significant hazard there for transferring this employee. So, that in that case, the other piece of evidence we had there that sort of raised the alarm bell on this one was the employee worked in farrowing at both farms, and the outbreak in this farm that we were investigating started in farrowing. At least that's where they saw the first clinical signs. So sows off feed. They saw that first in farrowing, and that's where he worked, right? And so, again, the timing, the location of where you see first clinical signs, sometimes that can be valuable here. So in this case, don't know if I'd quite call that a smoking gun, where we were almost certain that's how it happened, but it was pretty darn close in my opinion. The second one here was called the replaced feed line. And this one was a case where had a company repairman came in and fixed a feed line, and had a piece of plastic from the lining of a feed bag got caught in it. And so we had actually, by this time, I had done several outbreak investigations for this production system, and the herd veterinarian in particular, I'd done 3 with him before this. And every time I would ask him, do you allow parts or tools or supplies to be transferred from one farm to another? And he was adamant, nope, we don't allow that. That never happens, right? Well, after this one happened, he went in and dug into this a little bit more and found out that there was a outdoor parts yard, right, that the maintenance guys kept. And if they had some extra parts left over from a job, they would dump them out there. And if they needed them, they would go pick them up. And that's what happened in this case. That auger came from that outdoor parts depot or yard. And to make matters worse then, the farm manager was gone that day that they did the repairs. It actually took 2 days. Happened on the 22nd, 23rd here. And so the farm manager was gone. The farm manager didn't know. Nobody on the farm knew. Did he shower in, shower out? Don't know. Did he ever go out, have to get extra parts or some tools from his truck? Don't know. Didn't know anything, right? So this maintenance guy worked in perfect anonymity while he was out there, apparently. So, and then again, they saw first clinical signs in exactly that same spot, right? Right where the feed line was repaired, where they first saw sows off feed, submitted diagnostics, and it confirmed it positive, right? And that actually, the first clinical signs were observed about 5 to 6 days after the repair there on the 28th of November. And so this repair events, in terms of smoking guns that we find, we don't find smoking guns very often. That's really not what we're necessarily planning on, right? Where, again, you find something, you say that almost certainly was the cause of the outbreak. In this case, everything lined up here, right? And so we would have probably called this, or did call this, a smoking gun. And these repair events are the most common smoking gun that we find. Okay, they don't happen very often. They're not frequent events, but when they do, holy cow, okay? There's a lot of hazards that come with those. You guys, I'm probably talking to the choir here, but maintenance and repair people don't like to be told what to do. They like to work in anonymity and kind of do their own thing. So it's a big challenge, I think. This last one, called the pregnant girlfriend here, this was a case in North Carolina where the company's policy was that we don't allow employees on sow farms to live with anybody that works at another swine farm outside the company, okay? And so one of the employees on the sow farm, though, had a girlfriend that worked on a sow farm for another company. They didn't live together, so they weren't technically violating the policy, but just right before the outbreak, she got pregnant. So obviously there were opportunities for cross-contamination there, right? And so, again, highlighting that we have no control, and even in this case, I'm not, well, I suppose it was obvious that she was pregnant at some point, but we have low control and sometimes very little knowledge of what employees do when they're away from the farm. And so just some summary and final thoughts. Have investments in biosecurity been effective? Yes, but not sustained. Okay, we just don't seem to be able to keep them. So it works, but not for very long. What can we do to make more sustainable progress? I think these hazard analysis, doing them in the context of an outbreak, as an outbreak investigation, or prospectively, either one, is a good way to sort of maintain a steadier level of vigilance, right? If we're constantly looking for things to scare us, we're not going to get complacent as easily. Okay, that's really the idea in a nutshell. The other thought I want to leave you with is one size does not fit all. Between production systems, the way things get done, how they get done, the hazards that are associated with them vary greatly, okay? Even within companies, it's actually been a bit stunning to me to see how different things are done from farm to farm within the same company, okay? And so, if we're sitting here saying, well, surely there's things we should all be doing, right? We can look at these lists of biosecurity practices that are suggested that we do that, or somebody suggested that we do those things, or the standards where somebody says, okay, if you want to do this, then you have to do that. You have to satisfy these biosecurity standards, right? None of those are going to be very effective, though, unless we first know, are those really addressing the hazards that are the most significant hazards that we have, right? Are those really addressing the things that are putting our farms at highest risk or making them most vulnerable? Okay, if we can't answer that, first, then just going to these lists or the standards and doing those things is just not going to be very effective, okay? And so that's the last thought I guess I want to leave you with here, so.
Anybody have a question? Here we
go. We talk about monitoring staff and if we're going to do fever monitoring for flu or PRRS monitoring and swabbing. Have you heard of any systems that have successfully continuously executed on any kind of a monitoring program
Yeah.
with incoming environmental risk?
Yeah. That's a great question, Bill. Actually, I think it points to a big opportunity area that we have here, right? First of all, fundamentally, if you're going to try to do that, you have to have somebody responsible for that, right? That's going to be either receiving the information and then updating that health pyramid or whatever you call it, right? So that the schedules, if you're basing a feed delivery schedule or livestock schedule off of that, it's got to be as updated as possible, right? And the only way that happens is if you've got somebody that's accountable for that, in my experience. Number two is there's a big opportunity, I think, to do that sort of, I don't want to call it surveillance, but that monitoring better, right? So I think sometimes the lag between when these outbreaks happen or when the introduction happens and when we know about it, for PRRS especially, could be days, certainly easily, weeks, probably could even be months in some cases, right? And so when we do outbreak investigations for PRRS, we go back 4 weeks, a month, and I'm not 100% confident, Bill, we get the day that virus was introduced, right? So, and I'm sure you don't disagree with that, but that's a big gap we have, even in sow farms where we monitor those pretty intensely, and certainly in growing pig, nurseries, finishers, wean to finish, where we don't monitor those as closely with diagnostics. It's basically strictly clinical monitoring, and that can be kind of hit and miss, right? So I think there's some real opportunities out there for some new technology. I don't think we have anything today that is cost effective, right? I mean, I don't think we can do, if we did enough diagnostics to try to figure that out, we'd be broke in a month. But I think there's some of these, maybe it's sound, maybe it's monitoring pits, maybe it's monitoring the air, maybe it's some of these motion sensing technologies that are coming out. But I think there's a huge opportunity there for somebody that can figure that out. How do we find out when there's health events, basically, in these groups of growing pigs or in sow farms? How do we do that in more real time? And that'll give us the opportunity, I think, to do a better job then for biosecurity purposes if we want to try to manage that a little bit better, right? So that we're not hauling pigs from a positive farm right before we haul negative pigs, right? That's the idea. So.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Let's give Darrell one more appreciation and thank you for